It was here that American forces mounted one of the most desperate and defiant defenses in all of Revolutionary War history, with perhaps one of the most shocking endings. It was right here at this little known fort that about 160 American militiamen held off over 700 determined British troops when, upon the British breaching these very walls and crashing through this very gateway, over 80 Americans were killed and dozens more wounded. History has almost forgotten what happened here. But I promise you, you won't. Today, we are at Fort Griswold in Groton, Connecticut, one of the only Revolutionary War forts that still stands today. This was the scene of the short but brutal Battle of September 6th, 1781, the Battle of Groton Heights, also remembered as the Fort Griswold Massacre. The small American militia force inside the fort, outnumbered about 6-1, managed to hold off the British as long as possible. But from outside the fort, the British finally managed to breach the walls of the fort under very heavy fire from the Americans within. But the British weren't just under heavy musket fire or cannon fire. Once the British got so close to the fort that they were at the very base of the ramparts, right under the guns of the fort itself, one of the American defenders decided to take matters into his own hands, literally. 21-year-old Samuel Edgecombe manned an 18-pounder cannon here, and cannons were mounted on a platform that ran around the top of the walls of the fort at the parapet. And once the British got so close that they were practically underneath the big guns of the fort, Samuel decided to take control with both hands. One source on the battle said that Samuel hailed from a family celebrated for the great size and strength of its members. And when Samuel could no longer fire cannonballs at the British, he decided to throw them. Samuel heaved 18-pound cannonballs, dropping them onto the British from his position on the platform in the fort. And he continued to do this until he was felled by a shot. As the British breach these walls, the battle breaks out into desperate hand-to-hand combat. The gate to the fort, which originally stood here in this gateway, up until now had remained closed, effectively keeping out the still hundreds of British troops outside the fort. But the gate doesn't remain closed. It breaks open. Hi everybody, it's me, Katie. Welcome back to my channel where it is all Revolutionary War all the time. On this channel, we venture out on historical action adventures and we visit places where events of the American Revolution actually happened. we made it. We made it. This is the first video that I have filmed out of state. We have ventured out of Massachusetts, and we are here in Groton, Connecticut, on the Thames River, across from New London. And we were able to do this because of you who are watching right now, and everyone who has liked and hyped my videos and made super thanks contributions. Thank you so much for all of your support. This is just the beginning. I'm so excited. There are so many more amazing stories to tell. So I hope you'll consider subscribing or liking or hyping this video if you feel it merits it. Thank you all so much, truly, for being here with me. Now back to the video. The gate bursts open, and the hundreds more British troops that the Americans had been desperately fighting off all pour into the fort. Even given the significant casualties that the Americans had been able to inflict on the British during the battle, equaling about 200 British casualties, or 20 to 25% of their force, the Americans are still grievously outnumbered as hundreds more British soldiers flood into this fort. Knowing they are outnumbered, the American commanding officer here at Fort Griswold, 42-year-old Colonel William Ledyard, tries to surrender the fort. Some say that Colonel Ledyard was struck down by his own sword in the moment of surrender. Others that he was killed during the battle by a British bayonet. What's certain is that he made it to about this point when he was killed, having defended Fort Griswold to the last. Some of Colonel Ledyard's men follow his lead and throw down their arms, but it made no difference. As the British streamed in, they put everyone in their path to the bayonet. And inside the fort, here, there's really nowhere to go. There was the barracks. The barracks stood here where you can see this outline. And some Americans did try to take cover inside the barracks, but it was no use. The British followed them, some smashing the windows of the barracks in order to fire upon the Americans who were taking cover inside, killing them all. Some of the Americans attempted to take cover in the gunpowder magazine. Now, I've read of people being extremely cautious in gunpowder houses or magazines for fear that their shoe or a nail in their shoe could ignite a spark on the floor of the powder house, which could cause an explosion. But unbelievably, the British troops pursue the Americans to the magazine and fire upon them in the magazine. Miraculously, it did not explode, although several of the Americans were killed. One of the participants later said that he thought the reason that the magazine didn't blow up was because of all of the blood inside, which extinguished the flame. As for Samuel Edgecombe, who had been heaving the 18-pound cannonballs onto the British, he was shot, but he lived. He was shot in the hand, the musket ball blowing off the top part of one of his fingers. But despite his wound, and perhaps owing to the legendary great size of his family, he was able to carry another wounded American out of the fort later in the battle, and he actually lived until 1843, not dying until he was in his 80s. Only about 6 Americans had been killed during the battle before the British overran the fort. But once they did, about 80 Americans were killed within minutes, and dozens more wounded or taken prisoner. The Battle of Fort Griswold, or of Groton Heights, is not widely remembered in Revolutionary War history. But once you know what happened here, the heaving of the cannonballs, the firing into the magazine, the shocking casualty rate, you will never forget it. We have a lot more ground to cover, and I hope you'll consider liking and subscribing so that you don't miss the next one. I hope you'll come along with me. Thank you so much for being here. See you next time.